I think that what is very difficult is that just because medicine can do something doesn't necessarily mean that we should. And in some ways, I believe we as physicians have inserted ourselves into a very mysterious and beautiful act and creation of a child. And it's a slippery slope because once we start doing that, where does it end? Okay. And there's a dark side to this that I think can occur.
So tell me more about that. So were you working actually in a place where they were doing IVF? Was that part of the focuses of the system you were working in? And then what was that like? And you mentioned there's a dark side to it. Tell me more about that.
Right. Yeah, I was doing IVF and was working at a center that performed in vitro fertilization, which is essentially where a woman is given medications to stimulate her ovaries to produce more than one mature eggs. And then there's a process called an egg retrieval where those eggs are removed from the body through a needle that's placed through the vagina and watched under ultrasound guidance. And then outside of the body, the mature eggs are combined with sperm. And the embryos that result are watched over a period of days. And then a certain amount of them may be biopsied to be screened for certain issues or chromosomal screening and or transferred back into that woman's or another woman's uterus. And so that's the process of IVF in general. And so, yes, I was doing it all the time. And I would say that my experience with it, again, I think that it wasn't all negative. It wasn't all dark. There was a lot of joy in when people were able to get pregnant, and they were, again, that was beautiful in that sense to be able to what I thought help, right, in that way. But I would say in terms of the dark side is that, oh my goodness, again, there are multiple things. I think that for me, it's that for some reason, we've all put it into our minds that IVF is the perfect cure, that we're going to have 100% chance of success. And we aren't in control, ultimately, number one. Number two, it isn't perfect. Again, just like anything else, there are pros with everything and there are cons. And those cons can be short-term risks, but they can be long-term issues for the mom, let alone the possibility that for babies, we do know that there might be an increase in risk of things like birth defects in babies born after IVF and ICSI, which is a way to place sperm into an egg, for example. And which is a slight absolute risk, but a risk nonetheless. We know that there's a lot of data coming out now looking at this incidence of donor half siblings, and 50, tens to 20s of donor siblings that might be meeting now and falling in love. And what does that kind of ramification look like as we move forward with more and more of this technology being used, right?
So in that case, there's a sperm donor, and then that man, his sperm is all these different places in terms of which eggs, it's turning into embryos with. And then there's different adoptive families, or there's not adoptive, but families that are maybe asking for the sperm donation. And you're saying in some cases, they're actually later on growing up and then finding each other, these children, once they're adults and falling in love and not realizing that they're biological siblings.
Absolutely. I think it was an article in the LA Times, I think it was actually, that discussed this one specific donor, and there were 50 plus of his biological offspring that were in potentially close proximity to each other. And then again, discussing what does this mean in even, 30 years when there might be even more. And so there's really a lack of some regulation, I think, in some parts. And that just is, again, one piece of it, okay? There's the adoption of new technologies, which, again, the progress and scientific progress is not a bad thing, but sometimes we don't understand the long-term ramifications. And this goes even for embryo screening and making these decisions on whether you're going to transfer that embryo back or not. And I remember being in that chair sitting, and there's a couple has one embryo. And we tested it, and it was screened as what's called aneuploid or abnormal.
So, like, do they know what does that mean?
It means that the chromosomes are not a normal number. The normal 46 chromosomes that are considered normal.
So, what kind of condition might that child have?
And so that does include things like Down syndrome, which is 3 copies of chromosome 21. There are other types, so you can have one less chromosome than you should, or multiple or complex abnormalities. Again, and then to tell this couple and to have to make that decision with them that a transfer would not be done because of that is heartbreaking.
What does that mean? The transfer won't be done.
That because the embryo was, again, screened, it's not a diagnostic test, it's a screening test, was screened as abnormal, that the embryo would not be placed into that woman's uterus.
So what would happen to that embryo?
The embryo would then be destroyed.